It was dark when Joanna Lucas left the accommodation complex and began her journey to work. Though nearer to Continental's site, she had a company bus card for the 16-mile journey from Marshall to Newtown. It would take her a good hour to walk the 7 miles from Chandler's apartment to getting on time. She didn't have Chandler's number, nor any contact details for him, come to that, and so, after getting up at 5, washing and dressing in the clothes she had level-headedly managed to throw into her bag, she quietly opened Chandler's apartment door and set off down the road which led to the highway. Joe had, at least, found a pen and paper, scribbling down a few words of gratitude for the offer of a bed for the night. Though she had slept fitfully, the serotonin was beginning to build behind her eyes as the walk in the cold and quiet began to pick her up from the dull-headedness that she'd had on working. She'd also added that she would no doubt seen him around at work, wondering why it was, in the cold, hard early light of day, that she had agreed to stopping over with Chandler. One step in front of the other, the rhythm was even and soothing, and her mind wandered to the cause of her leaving with him, the explosion. Whatever had caused such an earth-shattering din last night? Terrorists? An accident? She would no doubt find out when she arrived. And, at least if the canteen was open, she could have some toast and coffee. About 40 minutes into her walk, as the weak winter sun began to creep its rays over the horizon and lightly warm her face, she heard the sound of a car behind her. Stepping automatically from the highway tarmac and into the verge, a couple of cars had passed her already this morning. She turned, her heart rate increasing inversely proportional to the car's speed. As it slowed, Joe held onto her bag tightly. Whatever good it would have done her, she told herself later. As she was beginning to think she'd need to brace herself to swing her bag out at her potential attacker, and at least clobber him one with the end of the maps in her bag. Joe narrowed her eyes. The car drew up about a foot away from her and the window rolled down. "You could have waited for me, English. Or, was I giving you a head start?" Chandler Bing leaned out of the passenger side window. "I didn't want to presume," Joe replied, relaxing her muscles as the adrenaline ebbed. "And besides, it's cleared my head." "Well? Would you like a ride? It's not the best road to walk along for 5 miles especially in the dark. Cars drive awful fast along this road." Without waiting for her to answer, Chandler opened the passenger door of his Ford with one hand. "That would be smashing, thank you," said Joe, gratefully, her relaxed muscles making her feel a touch lightheaded. She climbed in next to him, swinging her bag into the back seat. "I hope not," Chandler replied, clearly unused to the expression. "I'll drive slow, Joe." Joanna exhaled as she relaxed into the passenger seat, her eyes losing for a moment. She hoped that her day wouldn't be too trying, then she could get back to her caravan and sort out. "Anyway, you left real early, didn't you get the SMS?" Joe opened her eyes, feeling in her trouser pocket for her mobile. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Nothing." She turned in the semi-darkness to Chandler, his face illuminated by the lights from the dials on the dashboard. "It's sold, second-hand. My signal's rubbish. We're not to report until 10:30. Whatever went down last night, you bet that Bob will have come in and investigated right away. You watch, there'll be increased security, like last time." "Last time? This has happened before?" "Nothing like this. Bob won't want anything reported that would harm profits, and bad publicity won't do him any favors." He dropped the gear into fifth and into a steady speed. "So, what would you like to do for a couple of hours?" 88,888,888. Breakfast burrito at a roadside diner and a few really food cups of coffee later, and Chandler pulled into his reserved space, turned off the engine and glanced around at the security men dotted around. Engineering was at the end of the site, past the main reception building and the car park, so she would have to walk down half a mile rather than a few dozen years from where the bus stopped. Beyond engineering, it was hard to ignore the half-mile-wide crater over which could be seen a dust cloud lingering nebulously. "Well, thank you again, Mr. Bing," nodded Joe, as she reached for her bag. "I'm down there." She inclined her head to the end of the site, isolated from the rest of the building as if in quarantine. She stepped out into the concrete and closed the passenger door as the winter wind blustered through her hair. "Well, whoever did this did a good job of it," Chandler nodded, in the direction of engineering. "It could not be ignored whichever of the two roads onto the plant's side you came. It was as if a bomb had gone off. It might have, for all they knew. Reckon you'll have the best view of it today," he added, closing and locking his own door. A few spaces to the left and another car pulled in. Chandler turned to see Andrew Waterman, who leapt out quickly, making to walk across the car park, then stopped, turning his head back to take in his original field of vision, the one which contained both Chandler and Joanna. "Bye," said Joe, smiling at Chandler, who smiled back. He would see her soon. He could suggest what he had wanted to suggest that morning another time. "Bye," he said, and, as she strode off, her bag shouldered in the direction of engineering, her place immediately taken by Andrew, who shook his head in amazement. "You son of a gun, you," he said, when Joe was out of earshot. "No wonder you were cagey with us last time, when we saw you talking to her. I mean, you and the English." He shook his head again, his face one of realization. "What?" Chandler looked at Joe's retreating back. And then when he realized what Andrew was driving at, frowned and folded his arms. "No, no," he added, emphatically. "I helped her out, that's all." "Out of her clothes?" said Andrew, laughing, as they made towards the office block. "Hey now, listen, man." Chandler stood by the door he was just about to open and looked severely at Andrew. "It was nothing like that. I'd appreciate it if you kept this to yourself, all right?" His friend looked at him, doubtfully, one hand on the door handle. "Okay, Chandler," he nodded, the man Chandler had known ever since he had joined Continental nearly 10 years before after coming out of Microsoft, and whom he considered to be a friend. "It's under my hat," Andrew finished, as the new security on the desk stepped forward, gnarled face typical of all heavies bending over them, which served to crinkle his face more. "ID," the man growled, as if any answer other than the positive would mean instant ejection of the both of them. Chandler reached quickly into his pocket, finding his card, which was used to operate the internal doors. "Mr. Waterman, please go ahead to your place of work, as normal." He turned to Chandler. "Mr. Bing, you are to attend the dispatch with the board at 11. 88,888,888. It had been almost entirely the opposite day that Joanna had planned, almost the entirely opposite week. Once the dust had settled, so to speak, on the deliberate act of vandalism as the explosion had been euphemistically termed, it was work as usual, more so for her, more frustrations as she waited for analytical profiling from the analytical chemistry department, who all thought they were God's gift to engineering when in fact it was they who caused delays, as well as copious amounts of money being used from Joe's project fund for what was essentially assays of sulfurous crude oil, with tiny percentages of methane. So, with complications like that to deal with, along with the crater where the explosion had happened still being the talk of the department, Joe hadn't wished for a weekend more. As they had arrived the next morning, a meeting had been called with all staff in the cafeteria, a place on site which could hold all of the workers at Newtown. Bob Samuel's lead, which was unusual. However, the explosion at the weekend had been unusual, and clearly he was there as a calming, steadying influence. Joe was thinking about all the things the man was like, very good at the talk, very good at persuasion. But you knew, when push came to shove, it was very reassuring to have a person like that on your side. "Sabotage," Bob had declared, "is plain and simple what happened to our company, our family, last night." He had then gone on to say that, as a long-standing American company providing cheap gas to the nation that meant less reliance on outside sources, some organizations were affronted by that, and were constantly trying to find ways to undermine the business. "I ask you to work with us to help get back into operation as soon as possible." So, the message had been that it was rivals, or people with foreign interests, rather than an environmental or local attack. Joe had found her mind drifting to Southport, and the green protesters there, wanting an end to fracking before it had begun. NIMBYs, yes, people who didn't want it in their backyard, as with everything, but several with major environmental concerns. "I'll need your report even more urgently, Miss Lucas," Nathan Daniels had told her as they had left. "The board need to be reassured that their investment will come to fruition, now they have relocated their focus from Pleasance to Westbury." And she had agreed. And soon it had become Friday lunchtime in far quicker the time she had ever known a week to pass, and she was waiting for Continental's chief executive officer outside the boardroom with her report. It had duly been accepted for consideration. The weather had got increasingly colder and, by the end of the week, a fortnight before shutdown, ice was forming on the inside of her caravan windows. But there had been some significant progress. Joe could feel that they were on the right lines, or, rather, strong, reinforced logic told her that. She was just impatient. Her proposal could now be backed up by test samples from the drill sites. They were positive. Her report and the samples reinforced one another. She was vindicated at least. But, the proof of the pudding would only ever be in the drilling. And now, watching the coldness crisp over the single glazed glass windows, she thought about the hour-and-a-half call back home. Timothy and James were well. They had spoken to her and had not asked too many hopeful questions of her. They had been delighted to hear her voice, and it had taken every ounce of willpower not to promise them she would see them at Christmas. And, she had called St. Catherine's. He was comfortable. Another appropriate euphemism. If only there would be a way that she could return to the 13th June, 5 years ago, and tell him that grocery shopping could wait. As her mind lingered on him, her eyes resting on the Bakken region, as the gas flare-offs gave the otherwise black sky an intermittent orange luminosity. There was a good chance, more than a good chance, that she was going to have been right and got Continental a huge claim. The horns from the cars, vans and motorbikes that were a permanent feature around the few shops within Marshall, punctuated the air. Her children ... her sister caring for them. Her work, which seemed to be promising an early departure from North Dakota, back to Southport, in Lancashire, from where you could see Blackpool Tower on a clear day. And it was, even if he didn't want to admit it, all down to him, Chandler Bing, who had happened to have Thanksgiving plans at work, as she had done. If she could only call him, to tell him. But she hadn't even seen him all week, let alone consider how she could call him without his mobile number. It was positive, Joe told herself, as she pulled her blanket round her, despite the fact it was only 6:30 on a Friday evening. 6:30. It was about the same time she had gone to see Chandler Bing in his office last week, and she had ended up at his place, platonically, of course. But the truth was, this week, with the added security and measures to prevent removal of any material from engineering, checking samples and traceability between engineering and quality control. In fact, so many things were checked it was clear that the stable door was now secure given that the horse had already bolted. Taking a quick wash and slipping into the warmest clothes she owned, Joe got into bed and vowed to make tomorrow count with work when her fingers decided to thaw and she could continue with her B2-layer report into the test sites. Closing her eyes, her mind resting on her colleague to whom she was in a great deal of moral debt, she gave a silent thank you and gratitude, until finally tiredness supplanted the image of his face in her mind as she drifted off to sleep. 88,888,888. That's great news, son. At about the same time as Joe was talking on the phone with her family, Chandler was talking to his. Beaming at the news that his son was revealing to him, he scrolled forward in his mind to Christmas. Somehow, he had to go down to the city to see Jack, and congratulate him properly. So, Harry Potter's son's friend, eh? Yeah, it's real good, Dad, Jack had said. Have you told your mom yet? Chandler had felt the pause in Jack's conversation at the mention of Monica, who could be quite critical of both him and Erica. Yeah. She's real pleased. She's coming over this weekend, she's hired a manager now, so she's got more time. That's great. She must be doing well. Hang on, Uncle Joey's just got back and wants to speak to you, Dad. Joey, thought Chandler. The man to whom his son, and he by extension, owed a great deal of thanks for Jack's break into acting. The line went silent for a moment, and then his friend spoke. "Hey, Chandler, did Jack tell you? He got the part?" "Yeah, he did. Thanks, Joe, you really helped him out, there." "Oh, no, Jack did all the real work. They wouldn't have casted him if they didn't think he was right for the part. He's a natural. And I got to go to," Joey broke off, as if to give his mind time to assemble the words he was about to say into the correct order. "What are your plans for Christmas?" "Well, I dunno, Joe," replied Chandler, sinking down onto his sofa. "I hadn't really thought about it. I've got some gifts from you guys and everything, but—" "Well, before you go on, cut in Joey, I have been made acting consultant for The Cursed Child on Broadway. It means I have to speak to a bunch of people over in London about the details. I'm to fly out on Christmas Eve, and I'll be back on 30th, just in time for New Year." "Sounds amazing, Joey, really it does. I've got to go to the West End, to consult on the play for the Broadway directors. I have to see it and make detailed notes. I have to see it and have a commentary about the importance of each part, each scene, each costume. It's going to be amazing. The hotel's on Trafalgar Square and, best part about it is, I have 2 tickets." His voice trailed off just for a second, and then he continued, "I was just wondering ... I wanted to ask you, Chandler, if ... if you would like to come with me, you know, to enjoy the sights, to see London at Christmas." "London? Wow. That would be something." Joseph Tribbiani, stage consultant, was going to have a knockout time. But ... London? He swore he'd never have that city feature on his social calendar again. "What I'm saying is, London at Christmas. With me?" Joey's words broke the flashback of that city which was beginning to be recalled by his cerebellum. "I could sure use the company. I would have asked Jack, but he has a pretty intense Christmas schedule of rehearsals if the show is to open in the spring." Can I get back to you on that one? London, you know Joe, it's where Monica and I ... you know." "Yeah, sure," replied Joey, "unless you have ... other plans?" "Other plans? No. I don't have other plans." "No? Not with ... the English woman? What's her name, Joanna Jane Lucas?" "No, not at all. I don't have any plans for Christmas," Chandler clarified. It had been a whole week since they had spoken to one another. She had gone off, wind in her hair, bag to one side, back to him towards engineering in Monday morning after finding her trying to walk to work, although during the week her name had appeared more than once in conversation. "Okay then, so how about next weekend you come down to see us, so that way I don't miss out on seeing my old roommate and my current roommate Stad before the holidays. I'd sure like to see you before I go." "I haven't said no, Joe." "But you haven't said yes." Chandler could tell by the tone in his voice that Joey was disappointed. "Yeah, I can come to the city next weekend," Chandler said. "Can you put Jack back on?" A crackle, and a quiet line for a moment meant that Joey was replaced by his son. And so it had been arranged. Next weekend, after shutdown, Chandler would spend Christmas with his son in New York. And he was glad, too. He would never have arranged it, but it had worked out okay. Chandler flicked on the TV and watched the scrolling CNN news bar at the bottom. Christmas in New York. Which would mean Christmas with his once close friends, now his in-laws, who blamed him squarely for his and Monica's divorce. Getting up for a lemonade, Chandler pondered on the prospect. There'd been worse Christmases, he supposed. 9 of them had been pretty lousy, away from the twins, for a start. But, this was the future now. His son was growing up, his daughter too. Considering the only other option was stopping here, practically alone for the holidays, Christmas in New York would be just what he needed. Just as Chandler was contemplating his holidays, an actor, in his great-grandmother's apartment, high-fived his roommate at a coup well initiated. 88,888,888. "Hey, have you heard? Andrew Waterman was leaning over the desk of Steve Silverman, his face reflected in the chrome desk lamp space as he grinned. A new scene of Raw has been confirmed. From his desk at the other side of the office, Chandler Bing looked up. Yeah? Well, that's great. Steve replied, relief on his face. I've moved once this year. I really hoped this was going to last longer. What with the extraction figures and everything, I told Marie that we could settle down for a while, rather than trekking across dozens of states for my job. Well, said Andrew, pushing over a sheet of paper conspiratorially. If you want to reassure her some more, take a look at this. Steve looked. Chandler, head turned as the latest batch data downloaded to the LIM, listened. Well, you're on it too. And Chandler. What am I on? Chandler had crossed the floor and was standing next to his friends. Oh, hey, said Andrew, while friends, Chandler was still their boss. Michelle, he said weakly. You're on it too, Chandler. It's engineering that's taking a bit of a loss, though most of them will relocate to Louisiana or Texas, no doubt. Yeah, echoed Steve. But that's impossible. One of the biggest claims Continental has ever got, and we're losing people? Andrew and Steve exchanged looks. Hey, I'm sorry man, Andrew began. Sorry for what? The stuck-up English prig, he said. Looks like he mimed a chopping action against his neck. Isn't on it, said Chandler. 'Cause that's the administration list, he corrected, pointing at the footer. Not that it matters much to me, he lied. I helped her out that one time, anyone would. Okay then, said Andrew, folding up the illicit page. You just see if I'm right. The merger's off, you know that? Quadrilla's too expensive, especially now they've got a new Raw at Westbury. They aren't going to be keeping on staff, especially not filthy foreigners. I'm not interested, Andrew. Besides, I need the latest geophys data put onto the shared drive, so please, get rid of that before I remember that I saw it, and get 'em to me, okay? Andrew raised his eyebrows to Steve, who shrugged and looked back at his monitor. And that might have been the end of the matter, had not a certain initiator of the proposal of drilling at Westbury come up to the tech processing office to speak to tell the head of tech that, with his help he had been successful. Jo, her cheeks burning, darted quickly from the door. She had been there with the pragmatic proposal that if she subrented his spare room for the remainder of her working time at the site she might feel a little more comfortable. He seemed a good person, and there had been an arson attack on a van opposite hers, and the atmosphere at Marshall was becoming decidedly hostile between locals bringing vehicles there to confront gangs of Continental's workers. Now Jo knew better, and thanked fate for allowing her to overhear his true feelings. At last, it would save her a lot of trouble in the long run and not to get involved with people again. She had been successful here, she knew, and whatever the future held, Jo knew that she would be able to do it again. 88,888,888. Okay, but this will be the last thing I say on the matter, Andrew said, looking at Chandler Bing across his monitor, decorated festively with tiny baubles, trees and Santas. There's been security all over the place the night before last. Rumor has it that someone tried again. It had been nearly a fortnight since Chandler had brought back Joanna Lucas to work after the explosion had put half of the site out of commission. Since then overtime had been paid for any worker who had come in to help the company get back on track, food had been laid on, and there had been something of a camaraderie atmosphere, pulling together to help rebuild and repair. Security had remained tight, and there were few places that any worker could go without a large security guard around, not so much keeping tabs but ensuring presence. Ah yes, rumor, that reliable of messengers, said Chandler, sarcastically, as he pressed the send button on the stratification data. It had been more than true that Westbury had held such an unimaginable amount of raw, shale gas and oil that was ready for extraction. And he had often thought back to the day on Thanksgiving where he had encouraged Joanna, lacking in confidence as she had pored over the local maps, to give it her best shot with the board. And what a result for the company! It was only right she was highly praised for this. It had been a pity that he had not seen her since he had found her walking to work the day after the explosion, In the staff meeting held the day they had got back, he had looked for her where the engineering workers were standing and had glimpsed the back of her head. But that had been it. But, he supposed, they had all been at it. Even he, the man you would not have seen dead at work of a weekend, had come in to process not only the Westbury data but to manage the regeneration of the blast area by running viability data through the limb. And then, a few nights before, he had gone out there, to Marshall, to see how Joe was. The van's lights were on, and he could hear her talking. Getting to the door, however, he was shocked to find it had been broken, nearly in two, and a repair had been done. He had gone to knock, but had heard her, still talking, but with a choking in her voice, and had left. Well, what else do you suppose has caused the Newtown data to be offline? If I told you, then I'd have to kill you, said Chandler, to his friend's conspiracy theory. Perhaps the English? Suggested Steve, looking up over his monitor now. She won't be here long, replied Andrew, grinning. Chandler felt himself bristle. And why do you say that? She's not losing her job. She has saved this company by opening up a large amount of raw in a place that even the execs thought was unproductive. Yes, but, what you seem to be forgetting is that, while Continental is saved, we aren't taking Caldrilla. The merger's off the table, I know that for a fact. From the fragrant Michelle Smith? Steve added, as Andrew grinned, and he tapped the side of his nose. You should get some, Chandler, man. Didn't you have her practically living with you at one stage? Get out of here, Waterman, or I''ll ... reconfigure your hardware. If that's a euphemism, it's rather funny. No, I'll reconfigure it, all these wires, you won't believe what I can do to your CPU. And RAM? It wouldn't be rammed with any more field readings. Hey, have we touched a nerve? Asked Steve, grinning too at the ribbing they were giving their friend. Forget it, Chandler, said Andrew, hurriedly, noting his boss's expression. If you can't make it with the woman who you've had under your roof twice, then that's your loss. All I'm saying is, those people going will know by shutdown. Merry Christmas. Yeah, whatever, Chandler grumbled back, thinking about the conversation he had accidentally overheard, the tears, the half-destroyed door. He'd go tonight again, and check she was okay and propose something which he had intended to put forward to her after she had stopped the second time. It would be doing him a favor if she would house-sit when he went to New York for Christmas. It had to be better than Marshall. 88,888,888. Hey Joey, you know that ticket for London? Yeah? Joey, still a bit out of breath after taking the stairs of the apartment block 2 at a time, sat down on the step between apartments and answered his call. Can I still buy it off you? You wanna go to London with me? Joey felt his heart sink. He and Jack had been pleased with one another that they had got his dad over at Christmas. Monica would be there, and whatever they might want to work out might, well, work out for them. After last time? Sheesh. The English prig whose wallet Jack went through. She's not a prig. I regret ever making a joke with the guys. But yeah, for the English. There was a long pause. Joey was thinking. I said yes before, Chandler. But she mustn't be seen. I want no part in this. No part in what? Another pause. No part in taking an English back to England? Joey's words were clumsy and ordinarily Chandler would have picked up on it. As it was, he grinned down the phone. Okay, so I can buy the ticket? No. You can have the ticket. It's a 9:30 flight from JFK back early hours on 30th. Look, man, are you sure? I'm coming to spend Christmas in the city, with my children, my ex-wife, her parents, my brother-in-law, Rachel. I'm doing my bit for good cheer. I just need to send the karma around a bit so I can get a break in 2019. She's about to lose her job and she doesn't know it. Oh, alright. But come over with her, Chandler, alright? Otherwise, it would seem a bit strange me boarding a plane to London with a woman I've never met before, who you shared your apartment with but are not dating, not sleeping with, and who you feel sorry for. Okay then. There was a pause. Chandler was about to say bye and hang up the phone when Joey added, "Oh, by the way, Jack was supposed to have asked you days ago, but didn't get around to it. You're staying with him at the apartment at Christmas and New Year." "Oh, I am?" Chandler was about to retort to this. He'd planned to book a late hotel and at least have a bit of space to himself in case it turned ugly. Then, he thought about what he'd just asked his friend to do. "Too right I am," Chandler declared, trying to force himself to think about the fun they'd have, with their grown children in NY. Like the last time. Of that train wreck when solitary confinement would have been better than having to spend 16 hours putting on a show of pleasantness at Ben's wedding. He forced the thoughts from his mind as Joey began to speak again. "All right," he summarized, leaning against his desk. "All right. I'm driving to NY, with the English, at which point you'll be at the airport JFK Airport, with the tickets. She'll go off to London and be with her family, coming back early on 30th, and I'll be enjoying Christmas with my ex-wife, my grown-up children, my old college roommate, who still hates me for divorcing his sister, and his wife who will not have any good thing to say to me. And I'll be sober." "That's right," confirmed Joey. "And you'll be taking them to the Jellers on Christmas Day, to spend the day with them, and Erica and Emma." "Oh my! Life couldn't get any more exciting." "Well, that's good," smiled Joey, the sarcasm totally passing him by. "It's going to be a really great Christmas." 88,888,888. A knock on the door caused Joe's heart rate to quicken and she froze midway through folding up some of her washing. It had been a long fortnight, but at last she was trying to make some headway. In a couple of days' time it would be Christmas Eve, and the plant would shut down, and she would be able to spend a few days not working, trying to enjoy a break, and desperately missing her family, and bearing the guilt her mother had put on her for not being home with James and Timothy, declaring that if she cared about them at all she would find a way. "Just a minute," she shouted, thinking to herself that she hoped it wasn't teenagers again, bored as they inevitably were at Marshall, Caravan City, with nothing better to do than play knock and run. It was too early for the gangs, they had caused the door to cave in at the weekend. To their credit, Continental had sent someone out to do a temporary fix, and it did close. When she had moved the chest of drawers back from it, her heart almost in her mouth from adrenaline as Joe wondered who could be knocking, she felt her knees sagging as she gasped, "Chandler. No gang warfare. No bored kids." Then she felt her face redden. "Hi," said Chandler. "Sorry to call so late, it's just I haven't seen you. What did you do to this door?" "Locals," said Joe, shortly, holding on to the door frame. "So, can I come in?" He smiled at her, and peered past into the van. "Sure," said Joe, standing aside. The place was still a mess. It was hard to keep a small place tidy when it was not only your bedroom and living room, but also your kitchen, bathroom and office. "Can I get you something? Tea? Coffee?" "No thanks," Chandler said. "I just stopped by to see how you were doing. We're closing up tomorrow, and I haven't seen you for nearly 2 weeks." Joanna stopped. It was a shock to see him, even more so when she noted the Christmas paper-wrapped gift he had in his hand. "Please, sit down," she said, her voice subdued. So, why was he there? He'd called her an English prig in front of his friends, and laughed about not sleeping with her. And now here he was with a gift for her. "I'm sorry, I haven't got you anything," Joe said, making a smile show instead of discomfort. She hadn't a gift for him because she hadn't thought he would want one. She couldn't imagine Chandler, the kind man she thought he was, would want anything off her again. Why he had come to see her was a mystery. They were just acquaintances who had got on well a fortnight ago, and then they had parted. Mainly, because, well, didn't you call me an English prig? Chandler stopped, his face frozen as he began to think rapidly. When did I call you that, Joanna? Last Tuesday, when I came up to your office to tell you the B2 layer had been drilled and raw had been extracted. Her face reddened in the dullness of the caravan's overhead strip light. You said the English prig wasn't on the list. She watched his face move into one of shock, and, though one part of her wanted to discuss it, there was an overriding part which reminded her to come to her senses. I'm an English prig? Yes, yeah, I did say that. But not you, not about you. It was. He paused. It wasn't going to sound well however he said it. It was a few months ago. Me and the guys were just fooling around. But you didn't know me months ago. Joe's words brought the conversation to a stop. Chandler looked at her and then away. Look, I am grateful and everything that you came all the way over here, with a Christmas present for me, she finished, looking past him and staring at the wall, doing anything to keep her composure. And, for what it's worth, I came up to tell you about us hitting oil and gas, and to say I had to present to the board next week, tomorrow now, with Nathan. And also to thank you. So, thank you, Chandler. Chandler got up, placing the gift onto her table. He couldn't, really couldn't, bear to see her face looking like that, hurt, cold, alone, afraid. I am sorry, Joanna. For what it's worth, I didn't know you then, and I'd never have said those things about you. Now I know you. It sounded lame, even he knew that. See you at work tomorrow? See you at work, repeated Joanna, her face frozen, as he let himself out. But he had said those things, she let her mind think, as she heard the Ford's engine spring to life outside. And yet, he'd brought her something. Pushing the chest of drawers across the back of the door, then peering out through the curtain momentarily, Joanna's frozen exterior melted into a flood of tears whose torrents overflowed into the early hours of the morning. 88,888,888